Tensions are rising in the Red Sea. Yemen's Houthi militias are attacking shipping, paralyzing a key global trade route. And in early September 2024, their attacks on oil tankers threatened to cause an environmental disaster. The United States has responded with airstrikes on Houthi positions, and the militant group is mobilizing for what it describes as a new holy war.
We wanted a confrontation with the U.S. for a long time.
In the north of Yemen, the Houthi movement has long since established totalitarian rule.
The Houthis only believe in war. They're a seed that's been planted and grown by Iran.
How do they maintain control over the people? And what does the future hold for Houthi-controlled Yemen? The country has been brought to its knees by 10 years of war. Hunger and displacement are rife.
This war kills children. It's killing our parents, our brothers and sisters.
We're traveling into a severely restricted area. For years, hardly any Western journalists have been allowed to come here. But we've been granted access by the Houthis. Driving along gravel roads and riverbeds, we cross the front lines of Yemen's civil war, from territory controlled by the internationally recognized government into the realm of the militant group. This is where most of the country's nearly 34 million residents live. The capital, Sanaa, is under Houthi control. It's afternoon. At the market, traders wait for customers while chewing khat leaves. The mild stimulant is used by many on a daily basis, Yemen's equivalent of tobacco or alcohol. Some seem surprised and pleased that we've made it here. Others see us as representatives of the enemy and are more confrontational.
We're used to airstrikes. It's been that way for a long time, since the world began ganging up on Yemen. Whether young or old, we Yemenis are patient. We endure all hardships.
This man is praising Hamas. Elsewhere, Palestinian and Yemeni flags have been sewn together in a gesture of solidarity. The violence in Gaza is all too familiar to Yemenis. Here, too, thousands of civilians have been killed in external attacks, in this case by a Western-backed, Saudi-led military coalition.
We will not stand idly by and watch the injustice in Gaza. Even if all the women here become widows, we'll win, God willing.
Exiled Yemenis warn us to expect a police state as restrictive as North Korea. And it's true that we're escorted by Houthi security officials who control every question we ask, every answer we're given, and every image we capture with our cameras. Most people here seem afraid of being filmed and prefer not to answer our questions. Fatima al-Asrar keeps a close eye on her homeland from outside the country. She's in constant contact with people still in Yemen.
It's extremely difficult for people to speak their thoughts or opinion in Houthi-controlled areas. Even private meetings are spied on. You know, people know exactly who you met with, who's coming to your home, who's leaving. So there's this kind of paranoia. It's through that type of control that they're able to control the narrative, give a certain perception about them, and also manipulate the people.
We're struck by the sheer number of pictures of fighters who've been killed in the conflict. There are thousands of them, each one celebrated as a hero. Many look like teenagers.
The role of children in the Houthi power structure is the role of pawns in a chess game. They are cannon fodder for the Houthis. They are really zealous fighters. A lot of them are recruited through enticement, not through intimidation.
I need to start dressing in black, the color the Houthis have ordered women to wear. I'm told that's the only way I'll be allowed to watch the Friday rally. The demonstration has become a weekly display of the Houthis' power. More than 1 million men are gathering to vent their hatred of the West, Israel, and Jews. Women are not allowed. They've made an exception for me. Almost everyone carries a weapon. Nevertheless, they all have to be searched. Even young children are here too. The group's leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, can only be seen in these images. Considered holy, he doesn't appear in person. His clan sees itself as superior to the rest of the population because they're supposedly descended from the Prophet.
It's the personality of the cult leader. He is playing on the narrative that the West has extracted so many resources and explaited, rather than extracted, from the Muslim nations. As Yemeni people, that they should rise up against that kind of aggression. What the Houthis are saying is that, look at Gaza, you could be next.
They've already trained 200,000 fighters for the conflict in Gaza and their campaign in the Red Sea, which they call a holy war.
We've escalated our operations because the enemy continues to escalate theirs in Gaza. We've mobilized rockets, drones, and military vessels. We now also have underwater weapons, which will cause the enemy big problems.
Getting an interview with the Houthi leadership isn't easy. After some wrangling, we're allowed to meet with the information minister of the group's self-proclaimed government. He's a key figure in the movement's propaganda apparatus.
Our leader has advised the EU and especially Germany not to get involved. We hope Germany won't involve itself in the American war against the Yemeni people, because we'll fight all those who stand on America's side.
The Houthis are counting on war with the United States. They're using the new conflict for domestic political purposes to extend their claims to power across the whole of Yemen. That includes getting access to highly coveted oil and gas resources in other parts of the country. Who are the Al-Houthis, the little-known family that has Yemen in its grip? The current leader's father was a religious scholar of Zaydism, a form of Shiite Islam whose spiritual leaders ruled northern Yemen for centuries while shielding it from outside influence. In 2004, his son Hussein began a rebellion against the state, inspired by the mullahs in Iran. The ultimate goal was to create a global Islamic caliphate. When Hussein was killed, his younger brother Abdel Malik took over. In September 2014, Abdel Malik oversaw the capture of the Yemeni capital Sanaa by Houthi militants, with the help of training and support from Iran. Yemen's government was forced to flee to the south. Saudi Arabia, Yemen's powerful northern neighbor, put together a military coalition to intervene. Its goal was to restore the government to power by any means necessary. Using weapons supplied by the U.S., the coalition also bombed hospitals and schools. The fighting and the resulting humanitarian disaster claimed hundreds of thousands of lives.
They perceived a threat that's coming from the Houthis because of also their alliance with Iran and because of the weapons that they were getting. And also, in essence, it was the transitional government that requested that intervention.
But in 2023, the warring parties, Saudi Arabia and Iran, were suddenly shaking hands. the Saudis put offers of peace and significant compromises on the table. They were hoping to appease the Houthis, by now the most powerful force in Yemen. Meanwhile, political opposition to the Houthis was fragmented. With many Yemeni officials based outside the country, people had begun to call them the hotel government. Losing Saudi support would be a body blow.
It's when the Saudis have stopped intervening that there were, complaints and pushback on the Houthis. People were starting to speak up against them, and I think Gaza was just the perfect opportunity for the Houthis. It brings back the issue of foreign aggression, foreign intervention.
Since the Israel-Gaza war began, the Houthis have had successes in the Red Sea. The Galaxy Leader is one of their major trophies, a ship sailing under the flag of the Bahamas, owned by an Israeli businessman. Since the Houthis hijacked the Galaxy Leader, it's been anchored off the Yemeni coast near As-Salif. The Houthis are especially keen to show off their prize to a Western TV crew. There are shouts of "God is great" and "Death to America," "Death to Israel," "A curse upon the Jews," and "Victory to Islam." They also say they're waiting for what they call the battle for Jerusalem. I don't feel safe here on the deck of this seized ship, but actions like this have made the Houthis popular in some quarters, in the Arab world and beyond. They're able to present themselves as fighting for the downtrodden.
Our fighters have made Yemenis proud. They've walked all over the US, Israel, Germany, and Britain.
The fact that the Houthis managed to attack so many ships is thanks to its military partner, Iran. It sends the group coordinates, missile components, and drones.
They have received mentorship in a way that allowed them to transform themselves from, what could be seen as a ragtag militia in the caves into this big militia that everyone is interested in.
Back on land, I'm told that some of the Galaxy Leader's crew are still on board the ship. They've been held hostage for months. Our next destination is one of the poorest parts of the country, 5 hours' drive from Sanaa. After nearly 10 years of war, the country is suffering from one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. Nearly 5 million Yemenis are displaced. Many are forced to live in camps. Around 17 million don't have reliable access to food. This camp is home to livestock farmers and traders, many of them from the border region with Saudi Arabia. People here ask us to pass on a message to the world that they're now in desperate need.
We don't even get food aid from abroad anymore.
Our children have to beg on the streets for something to eat.
We have no food, no water, and no house, just the cold ground. There's no hope, not even for our children.
For months, this camp for displaced people hasn't received any aid from the UN World Food Program. Ali Mistbani collects and sells plastic bottles to help keep his family alive. He'll exchange them for a kilo of flour and a few vegetables.
Things are hard and they're getting worse. One day there's food, then the next day nothing. 2 days of hunger, then a day of food.
Every day, they have to make a 2-hour round trip to fetch water. Life revolves around two things: water and food. People here don't know anyone who's been able to return to their old homes, or what's left of them.
Back home there are mines. If the children step on them, they're dead. It's better here. We can stand the hunger. At least our children are alive.
We ask why the World Food Program has stopped aid supplies to this Houthi-run region. None of the aid workers will talk about it with us. Eventually, we learn about threats made against UN staff and humanitarian workers, and of kidnappings. we hear that the Houthis often handed aid supplies to their own followers rather than to those most in need.
There's an entire system of aid diversion that the Houthis have put in place. From 2017 onwards, we kept on seeing video footage of militia members, Houthi militia members, being photographed with packages from the World Food Program. We've seen ambulances from the WHO carrying Houthi militia members. And by controlling where the aid goes, they try to portray themselves as legitimate actors with the blessings of the international community.
A few kilometers away, there's a clinic for malnourished children run by aid agency Doctors Without Borders, or MSF. The stream of patients never stops. Doctors say that each day they're forced to turn many patients away. Over and over again, they're faced with the tragic task of asking mothers what they have at home to feed their families.
We eat grain and bread, really dry bread. She's getting worse and worse. Nothing's helping.
I try to understand the things I've seen and the causes behind the situation. International aid funding is getting smaller from year to year. Then there are the Houthis, whose attacks on shipping cause prices to rise because almost everything here is imported. There's the militant group's apparent misuse of aid supplies. Plus, there's an economic conflict between northern and southern Yemen.
We live with indescribable pain, fear, and grief. They're the consequences of war and famine. The majority of the country is experiencing hunger.
Doctors tell us that some of the children simply can't be saved. Women were among the first victims after the Houthis came to power. Travel bans, a morality police, and gender segregation. The movement is constantly coming up with new ways to restrict women's freedom of movement. To meet women here and ask them to share their stories would put their lives in danger. So instead, I meet a Yemeni woman in exile in Jordan. Yusra al-Nasheri is 21. She was sentenced to 5 years in a Houthi prison, but managed to escape. She says she went through hell back in her own country.
Before the Houthis, women had a say in society, an active role. There wasn't this disparaging view of them as inferior. Of course, Yemen is conservative, but women were important. Today, they're marginalized. They have no say.
Yusra's crime? These photos. It was her first photo shoot with uncovered hair. The dress was made by a Yemeni designer. Her friend, Entisar Al-Hamadi, a model, actor, and social media influencer, was also at the shoot. The Houthis detained the women right on the street and locked them up without an arrest warrant.
There's no woman who didn't experience torture in prison, who wasn't dragged across the floor by her hair or handcuffed for hours on end or put in solitary confinement for days. You can see the scars on my body. The Houthis use batons and electric shocks. I was tortured because I couldn't follow their orders. I couldn't comply. For the simple reason that I was raised as a human being with dignity.
Yusra saw several suicides in prison. She herself tried to end her life. Their captors then offered the women a deal. If they agreed to help compromise the Houthis' political enemies using sex and drugs, they'd go free. Both women refused. Yusra became ill. She was granted leave under strict conditions. She tells me that after several attempts, she managed to escape to southern Yemen using another woman's identity papers. Her family is still being persecuted, and her friend Entisar is still in prison.
The Houthis are mentally backward, uneducated terrorists. Their leaders live in villas and drive the latest cars. They have new mobile phones. Their children study at famous universities. Meanwhile, the people are suffering and hardly have anything to eat. But the Houthis live well. They use religion to further their own interests.
We drive from Houthi-controlled territory across the front lines of the civil war. Since an informal ceasefire took hold, the fighting has died down, but people are still waiting for peace. We arrive in Taiz, an isolated city of around 1 million inhabitants. Its northern districts are under siege from the Houthis. Before the war, Taiz was a center of culture and trade. Now both the city and its inhabitants are scarred by the conflict. The Frontline runs right through Taiz, separating family members who haven't seen each other in years. Despite the ceasefire, fighting still goes on here. Residents like Fatih Abdu and his family risked their lives just by living here.
There is no ceasefire. There can be no security and no ceasefire with the Houthi militias.
The Abdus are refugees. They were displaced by the war and moved here into a cold and drafty house without proper windows, electricity, or running water. They say what millions of Yemenis are thinking.
This is all because of the Houthis. Without them, it would never have got this bad. The Houthis drove us out of our homes. People had a good life, but the Houthis destroyed their houses.
Countless people in Taiz have been severely injured. They tell us that Houthi snipers are still targeting ordinary civilians. Fatih Abdu's neighbor lost his leg because of them.
The Houthis don't spare women or children, not the old or the young. They shoot at everyone. There are so many children who are 11 or 12 years old with amputated limbs. The Houthis are supported by Iran. Their goal is quite simply to destroy our Yemen.
The government's military is using piles of rubble as makeshift barriers, an attempt to keep civilians out of the line of fire. Everywhere we look, there are people with water canisters. The Houthis continue to occupy the city's water sources, so residents have to rely on occasional deliveries by truck sent by benefactors. Using thirst as a weapon against civilians is another possible war crime committed by the Houthis, even as they claim to be fighting for the rights of children in Gaza.
Fetching water causes constant conflicts and disagreements. Children can't go to school because they're queuing up all the time. The women suffer mentally and physically.
One year ago, Abdallah Salman was playing outdoors with some classmates when his life was changed forever.
I could play and run. Now I can't run anymore.
A mortar shell exploded near his house. The 11-year-old is one of thousands of children in Taiz who've lost limbs while playing.
One of the others lost his arm. I lost my foot. They made me a leg so I can walk. Sometimes the stump hurts when the weather's cold.
Shema was 6 when she lost her leg. She was playing outdoors when a rocket exploded near her.
When I did the exercises and felt how painful it was, I said to myself, I don't want this life anymore. I want to die.
But the training gave Shema self-confidence. She kept telling herself that nothing was impossible. Now, she's fully focused on physiotherapy and school.
We're children. We don't carry weapons. We don't know how to shoot. We're innocent. I have a dream to become a lawyer because I've seen the crimes the Houthis have committed. They're crimes against women and children, innocent people.
At Taiz's only prosthesis and rehabilitation center, they're constantly making new artificial limbs or adjusting existing ones. The technicians have to make do with the simplest of means.
The only materials and components we get are really basic. Not only that, because of the siege and the war, we sometimes have to wait a month or two for the supplies to get through.
Experts estimate that there are around 2 million mines in the country. Most of them were laid by the Houthis in residential areas. Children are often injured on their way to school or while collecting firewood. What does the future hold for Yemen? Is there any chance of lasting peace? I put those questions to a journalist, Mohammed al-Salahi. He was only recently released after being held captive by the Houthis for 5 years. He and his colleagues had been accused of collaborating with the enemy. He was often held in a small dark room and wasn't allowed to see his family. The Houthis even ignored a court ruling regarding his release.
They constantly threatened me with execution in order to wear me down psychologically. They tortured us by hanging us up, beating us, giving us electric shocks and immersing us in cold water. I still feel the effects of it today. I can't describe it. It's unimaginable.
He tells us of the extreme oppression of Houthi rulers who seem to have no concept of humanity or freedom. All they know, he says, are hatred and revenge.
I think the war's going to come back. Yemen won't achieve peace with the Houthis around. They came to power using force, and they're not going to leave except by force.
Accompanied by a security escort, we drive through Taiz, this city on the front line of the conflict. All around me, I can sense the fear that the escalating situation in the Red Sea might reignite the war in Yemen itself. This is a country that's been torn apart, where conflict has become a part of life. Yemenis are caught in the grip of the Houthis.